Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen amma ba'd a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Today you are going to learn Madani Qaida lesson number 16, Tafkhim and Tarqiq. Let's try to understand the rules first. Number 1. The meaning of Tafkhim is to pronounce the letter in a thick tone, and tarqiq is to pronounce the letter in a thin tone. Actually, there are some letters that are pronounced in a thick tone, and sometimes the same letters are pronounced in a thin tone. So if you pronounce a letter in a thick tone, that is tafkhim. If you pronounce a letter in a thin tone, that is tarqiq. Next rule. Alif, lam and ra are sometimes pronounced in a thick tone and sometimes in a thin tone. Alif, lam and ra. These three letters are sometimes pronounced in a thick tone and sometimes in a thin tone. So when these letters are pronounced in a thick tone and when they are pronounced in a thin tone, so you are going to learn in the next rules. What is the next rule? Next rule is alif. Alif will be pronounced in a thick tone if it is preceded by a letter that is pronounced in a thick tone, and it will be pronounced in a thin tone when preceded by a letter that is pronounced in a thin tone. That means if the letter before alif is thick, alif will be thick. If the letter before alif is thin, alif will be thin. Let me show you some examples. Please open the next page. Look at the first box, page 36. Look at the first box in line 1. You can see alif in this box, and before alif, qaf is thick because qaf is from mustadiya letters. So alif will be thick. Look at the second box. You can see alif in this box, and before alif, ra is thick because ra has zabar on it, and you learn that when the letter ra has zabar on it, ra is pronounced with thick tone. You read in lesson number 3 if you remember. So because ra is thick, so alif will be thick. And now look at the fourth box in the same line 1. You can see kaf in this box, and after kaf alif is coming. Because kaf is thin, it is not from mustaliya letters, so alif will be thin. Look at the next box. Mim is thin, so alif will be thin because the letter before alif is mim, and mim is thin, so alif will be thin. So I told you that if the letter before alif is thick, alif will be thick. If the letter before alif is thin, alif will be thin. It's very easy. Let's read the next rule now. Lam. If the letter before the lam of Isme Jalalat, Allah's name, has a zabar or pesh on it, then the lam of Isme Jalalat, Allah's name, will be pronounced in a thick tone. And if the letter before the lam of Isme Jalalat has a zair below it, then the lam of Isme Jalalat will be pronounced in a thin tone. It is very easy. Let me tell you in my words, in my simple words, that if you see zabar or pesh before Allah's name, then you have to read the lam of Allah's name with thick tone. If you see zair before the name of Allah, then you have to read the lam of Allah's name with thin tone. Let me show you the examples in the lesson. Please open page number 36 and look at the first box in line 3. You can see the word Allahu. you can see Allah's name in this word, and before Allah's name zabar is coming. So you have to read this lam of Allah's name with thick tone. And in the same way, look at the second box in the same line, I mean line 3. The word is Wallahu. You can see in this word the lam of Allah's name, and before the lam of Allah's name zabar is coming. So this lam is also thick. Now look at the first box in line 4. The word is Rasulullahi. In this word you can see there is a pesh before Allah's name. Pesh is coming before the lam of Allah's name. So the lam of Allah's name will be thick even in this word. You have to read as Rasulullahi. Now look at the last box in line 4. The word is Bismillahi. In this word you can see Allah's name, and before the lam of Allah's name zair is coming. So you have to read the lam of Allah's name with thin tone like this, Bismillahi. Don't read Bismillahi, that is not correct. Bismillahi, because there is a zair before the lam of Allah's name. Next rule. Every lam other than the lam of Isme Jalalat Allah will be pronounced in a thin tone. For example, open page 36, look at the second box in line 5. The word is Ma Wallahum. In this word the lam is not the lam of Allah's name, so you have to read this lam with thin tone. Although there is a zabar before the lam, but this lam is not the lam of Allah's name, so you have to read it with thin tone. Next rule. The conditions for when the letter Ra is pronounced in a thick tone. A. When it has a zabar or pesh on it. That means when the letter Ra has zabar or pesh on it, you have to pronounce it with thick tone. Next rule. When it has two zabar or two pesh on it. When you see two zabar or two pesh on top of Ra, you have to read it with thick tone. Let's read all of the conditions for when the letter Ra is pronounced in a thick tone. After that, I'll show you the examples where the Ra is thick. Next, when it has a khadi zabar, when the letter Ra has khadi zabar on it, you have to read with thick tone. When the letter before a Ra sakina has a zabar or pesh, if the letter Ra has jazm on it, if the letter Ra is sakin and before Ra sakin zabar or pesh comes, so you have to read Ra sakin with thick tone. Next rule. When there is a temporary zair before a Ra sakin. What is temporary zair? I'll tell you after these rules, but just keep in mind, if there is a Ra sakina, Ra has jazm on it, Ra sakina, and before Ra sakina a temporary zair comes, so you have to read Ra with thick tone. Next rule. When there is a zair before a Ra sakina in the preceding word. If there are two words, the second word starts with Ra sakin and the first word ends with zair. That means there is a Ra sakin and before Ra sakin zair is coming, but zair is in the preceding word, in the previous word, not in the same word. So in this case you have to read Ra sakin with thick tone. Next rule. When a letter of mustaliya comes after a Ra sakin in the same word. If there is a Ra sakin and after Ra sakin a mustaliya letter comes, so you have to read Ra sakin with thick tone. Let's see the conditions for when the letter Ra is pronounced in a thin tone. A. When there is a zer or two zer below it, so when the letter ra has two zer below it or ra has a zer below it, so in both of these cases you have to read ra with thin tone. When there is an asli zer, original zer before a ra sakin in the same word, if there is a ra sakin, ra has jazm on it, and before ra sakin zer comes in the same word, not in the preceding word or previous word, in the same word, zer before ra sakin in the same word, so you have to read ra with thin tone. Next, when there is a ya sakin before a ra sakin, there is a ra sakin, and before ra sakin, if ya sakin comes, you have to pronounce ra sakin with thin tone. Next rule, harka arziya, temporary. You read about temporary zer, when there is a temporary zer before a ra sakin, so you have to pronounce a ra with thick tone. So what is temporary zer? So they are telling us the temporary zer. In the Holy Quran, there are some words which begin with the letter alif, which has no harka. So whichever harka one will apply to such an alif during its pronunciation will be temporary. For example, in the word irji'i, the zer is temporary. That means there are some words in the Holy Quran. If you open the Holy Quran and see and look for this kind of word, so you will find that there are some words in the beginning of some ayat that start with alif, and alif has no harka, no zabar, pesh or zer on it. So whatever harka, whatever zabar, zer or pesh you put on it is temporary. If you put zabar on alif, that is temporary zabar. If you put zer below alif, that is temporary zer. If you put pesh on alif, it is temporary pesh. So whatever harkat you put on alif is temporary harkat. So we learn the rule that when there is a temporary zer before a ra sakin is pronounced with thick tone. So that means when you see the Holy Quran, any word starts with alif, and after alif ra sakin comes, and if you put zer below alif and you read, so that time you have to read ra sakin with thick tone. Note, ra sakin will be pronounced in a thick tone when in the same word the letter coming before it has a kasra arziya, original zer below it, and the letter coming after it is a mustaliya letter. For example, mir-swadin. You learn the rule that when there is a mustaliya letter after ra sakin, so ra sakin will be pronounced in a thick tone. So although there is a zer asli, original zer before ra sakin, but after ra sakin a mustaliya letter comes, so you have to pronounce ra sakin with thick tone. Let me show you the examples, and I will explain the same rules with examples so that you can easily understand all of these rules, when to pronounce ra with thick tone and when to pronounce ra with thin tone. Please open the next page, page 36, and look at the first word in line 6. The word is rajulun. You can see zabar on top of ra. You have to read it with thick tone. Look at the third word in the same line, ruziqu. You can see pesh on top of ra. You have to read it with thick tone. Look at the second last box, ajron. You have to read ra with thick tone because it has two zabar on it. Look at the last box, the word is ajrun. You have to read ra with thick tone because ra has two pesh on it. Now, look at the first box in line 7. The word is Ibrahim. You can see the letter ra has khada zabar on it, so you have to pronounce it with thick tone. Look at the next box, Arshun. You can see Ra Sakin in this box. Ra has Jazm on it, Ra is Sakin, and before Ra Sakin, Zabar is coming, so you have to read this Ra with thick tone. Look at the fourth box in the same line. You can see Ra Sakin in this box, and before Ra Sakin, Pesh is coming, so you have to read it with thick tone. Now, look at the last box in the same line, in line 7. The word is irji'. In this box, you can see Ra Sakin, and before Ra Sakin, a temporary Zair is coming. How do you know that this is temporary Zair? But when you read the Holy Quran, if you see this word in the Holy Quran, there will be no Zair below Alif. So you have to put Zair below Alif, and you have to read this word as irji'. So you have to read a Ra Sakin with thick tone, because this Zair is a temporary Zair. Now look at the fourth box in line 8. The word is Rabbirhamhuma. You can see Rabbi is a separate word, and next word which starts with the Ra Sakin is a separate word. So before Ra Sakin, Zair is coming in the previous word, in the preceding word. Rabbi is a separate word which has Zair at the end, and the next word starts with Ra Sakin. So before Ra Sakin, Zair is coming in the preceding word, in the previous word. So you have to read Ra Sakin with thick tone. Look at the second box in line 9. The word is Kullu Firqin. In this word, you can see Ra Sakin, and after Ra Sakin, Qaf Mustaliya letter is coming in the same word, so you have to read this Ra Sakin with thick tone. Now look at the first word in the last line. The word is Rijalun. In this word, you can see the letter Ra has Zair below it, so you have to read this Ra with thin tone. In the next word, Ra has 2 Zair below it, so you have to read with thin tone. And in the third box, you can see Ra Sakin, and before Ra Sakin, Zair is coming, original Zair is coming in the same word, so you have to read Ra Sakin with thick tone. And now look at the last word in the last line. The word is Nadhirun, and there is a circle sign which is the sign of Waqf. When this sign comes, you mostly make the last letter Sakin. So if you read that word with Waqf, so you will read Nadhir, you will make Ra Sakin. So before this Ra Sakin, Ya Sakin is coming, so you have to read this Ra Sakin with thin tone, because you learned the rule that when there is a Ya Sakin in before the Ra Sakin, so Ra Sakin will be pronounced in a thin tone. So you have learned and understood all of these rules. Now let me teach you line 1, and you have to read rest of the lines by yourself. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Qaf alif sabar qa, lam sabar la, qala, sad zair shi, ra alif sabar ra, shira, ta zabar ta, shirata, sin zair si, ra alif sabar ra, sira, jim do zabar jan, sirajan, kaf alif sabar ka, nun sabar na, kana, mim alif sabar ma, lam do zabar lan, malan, mim sabar ma, fa alif sabar fa, mafa, za do zabar zan, mafazan. Now we will read the same line without spelling. qala sirata sirajan kana malan mafazan. Okay, so you have to read rest of the lines in the same way. First read one line with spelling, after that without spelling, and then the next line, then the next line, and in this way you can read the whole lesson with spelling and without spelling. Sallu ala al-habib sallallahu ala Muhammad.